Welcome to Lesson 324, Solving Multiplication and Division Equations. Today we're going to talk about how to use division to solve multiplication equations and how to use multiplication to solve division equations. So the first thing that we need to know is the different properties of equality. We've talked about the addition and subtraction properties of equality, and now we're going to talk about the division and multiplication properties of equality. They're all essentially the same. And they're telling us that if we follow the golden rule of what you do to one side, you do to the other, that everything will work out equally. The only difference with the division property is that it has to be divided by the same non-zero number in order for the two sides to remain equal. So it can be any number except for 0. So what it is saying is if you have a problem that's like 9 times x equals 36, if you do divide by 9 and divide by 9, it will stay equal and you will get x is equal to 4. However, if you don't and you only divide by 9 on this side, you will get 9 times x is equal to 4. Therefore, they are no longer equal. It's no longer the same problem. Right, same thing down here. If I have x divided by 4 equals 9, if I multiply both sides by 4, everything stays equal or the same. But if I don't, and I just multiply this side by 4, I get x divided by 4 equals 36. Again, now they're no longer equal and it's no longer the same problem. So we don't want to do this. We always want to follow that golden rule. Alright, so we've already talked about solving addition and subtraction equations, and we know that to solve the addition equation we used subtraction, and to solve the subtraction equation we used addition. And we know that these operations are called the inverse operations. This is going to be true with all equations. We're going to use the inverse operation to solve. So if we're working with multiplication equations, what's the inverse of multiplication? Division. So division is going to help us solve these multiplication equations. So when I have 6 times y equals 36, I want to undo the times 6. So I think of, well, how do I undo times 6? I use the inverse. The inverse of multiplication is division. So I'm going to divide by 6, but what I do to one side I have to do to the other. And I know when I do that, 6 divided by 6, okay, is going to always give me 1. So any number divided by itself always gives us 1. And we're left with 1 times y equals 6. And I know that 1 times a number, according to the identity property of multiplication, 1 times any number is always going to give me that same number. It's going to allow that number to keep its identity. So I know 1 times y is just going to be y, so y is going to be equal to 6. Alright, so let's try this on a couple of problems. So here I have 7 times r is equal to 63. To undo the multiplication, I'm going to divide, and I like to show it this way because it's a little bit neater and faster for me. You can do, so show that what you do to one side, you do to the other. You can do 7r and then put divided by 7 equals 63. And then you can combine your like terms and see that the 7 and the 7 will make 1. Typically, students end up doing this because it's easier for them to say, okay, these two things are going to cancel each other out, and when you divide them, you end up with 1 times r equals 9. 1 times r is always r is equal to 9. Okay, sometimes students like to rewrite it and say 7, to put the 7 divided by 7 times, there we go, the r equals 63 divided by 7, and then you see, oh, those two things will cancel each other out. However, I think if you stick with the way that I'm showing you, that it'll start to make more sense and you'll get less jumbled up. But I do want you to know you have those options. So here again, we have 12 times u. To undo multiplication, I use division. I know it looks like a fraction, but remember a fraction is division. And to undo times 12, I'm going to divide by 12. But what I do to one side, I have to do to the other. I'm left with 1 times u is equal to 4. 1 times u is always u, so that's going to leave me with u equals 4. Now, I want you always to put the number back into the equation and try it out. So if I do 12 times 4, because u is equal to 4, so I plug in 4 where I see a u, is that equal to 48? If the answer is yes, then you got it correct. If the answer is no, you have to try again. All right, so I want you to pause, try this one on your own, and when you come back, we'll go over your answer. To undo times 6, I'm going to divide by 6. But what I do to one side, I have to do to the other. I'm left with 1 times I is equal to 7. 1 times I is always going to be I, so I is equal to 7. I double check, 6 times 7, does it equal 42? The answer is yes, so I know I got it correct. All right, so here you have a problem, and I want you to do two things. One, you need to set up the equation, and then you need to solve the equation. So remember, if we know that we are going to use division to solve it, then our equation has to have multiplication in it. And so Julie was at a gymnastics competition in Chicago. There were 15 teams in the competition, and there were 150 gymnasts total. How many gymnasts were on each team? Right, so again, you have 150 total, so you know that that has to be your answer. And whatever you do with 15 and your variable, we're going to use G for gymnast. It has to get you to that 150. Okay, so you're going to solve this one on your own, and we will go over it in class tomorrow. Okay, don't leave just yet, because now we're going to talk about division equations. So what is the inverse of division? We know that that's multiplication. This is where things get a little tricky, just like when we use addition to solve subtraction. It looks funny, but it works. You have to remember that you're undoing an entire operation, not just a single number. So in this case, what is the inverse of division? We said multiplication. I have y divided by 6 equals 6, and I set it up this way on purpose so you can understand why it works when you do division problems. So you have y divided by 6 equals 6. I know I use multiplication, so I multiply both sides by 6. So this isn't 6 times 6, remember, it's y divided by 6 times 6. So you're getting rid of the divide by 6 by timesing by 6. You're not just getting rid of the 6, you're getting rid of the division as well. Right? So also when you're working with a fraction, you have to remember, so we said y is like saying 1 times y. And if you multiply it by 6, we know we put 6 over 1. 6 and 6 can be simplified to 1, and I end up with y over 1. And I know that that is just equal to y. So here I end up with y divided by 1 is equal to 36. Okay, because over here I do multiply 6 times 6. I know y divided by 1 is always going to give me y, so y is equal to 6. I can double check and put, y is equal to 36. So I can double check, I can put 36 in for y and do 36 divided by 6. Does that equal 6? My answer is yes, so I know that I got it correct. All right, so again, when you're solving these, you can just put here. So I know it's u divided by 8 equals 7. So in order to get rid of the divide by 8, I'm going to times by 8. But what I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So I'm left with u over 1 is equal to 56, which means I'm left with u is equal to 56. Right, here I'm dividing by 12, so to get rid of that I want to multiply by 12. What I do to one side I have to do to the other. The divide by 12 and the times by 12 cancel each other out, so I'm left with 12 divided by 1 equals 36. T divided by 1 is always t, so t is equal to 36. Again, put your number back in. does 36 divided by 12 equal 3? The answer is yes. I got it correct. You can always solve and then put the number back in, and if you're unsure, use a calculator to double check. That's okay. You just can't use a calculator to solve and not show any work. So I'd like you to try this one on your own, and when you come back, we'll check your answer. I want to remind you that these symbols, so I know it looks like a fraction, but fraction means division. This is also another division symbol. So whenever you see these slashes or the fraction bar, it means division. So b divided by 6, to undo it, I multiply by 6. What I do to one side, I do to the other. So again, you can write it like this. So it was b divided by 6 times 6 equals 2 times. You can add that in. You can rewrite it underneath like this, so that way you can see that these two things cancel each other out. You get b divided by 1 equals 12. B divided by 1 is always b, so b is equal to 12. Right, and if I plug it back in, 12 divided by 6 equals 2, so we are all set. And don't just plug it back in and say that it works. Actually go back and check it out. All right, so here's the second problem you're going to try on your own. Penelope has 7 different colors of marbles. There are 8 of each color. How many marbles does she have total? Okay, we know that to solve this, we would use multiplication. So your equation has to use division. So I want you to set that up, and I also want you to solve it for tomorrow. As always, if you have any questions, please be sure to post them to Edmodo so we can go over them in class.